You've betrayed us all." The words echoed through the courtroom like thunder, bouncing off the high ceilings and reverberating through the hearts of everyone present. Mary Brown stood at the center, a figure both fragile and formidable, her hands trembling as they gripped a thick stack of papers. Every sheet held proof that had been painstakingly collected for months, a paper trail, bank statements, and letters, evidence of a secret that, if known, would rock her whole family to its foundation. She had waited patiently in silence for all those years, hoping the truth would never be discovered. She had told herself that maintaining the status quo was better than revealing Cody, the man whose heart she had once given, the father of her children, the man whom she knew loved them all with the same measure, to be a liar. But the burden of his deception had become intolerable. Every secret bank statement, every mumbled explanation, every half-truth consumed her like an insidious storm. Today in this courtroom, she would find her voice. The courtroom was quiet, an oppressive stillness that weighed on everyone in attendance. There was only the quiet rustle of papers and the random creak of a chair. The other wives, all but sitting together yet emotionally far apart, sat with faces a blur of shock, incredulity, and outrage. Their eyes were wide and glistening with unshed tears, and they shifted nervously between Mary and Cody. All of them had the taste of betrayal, but differently. Cody sat at the defense table, trying to keep a calm, steady expression, but his jaw was clenched, and the quiver in his hands gave away the turmoil raging inside. For years he had been the one in control here, controlling his image, his relationships, and his secrets. But now, the truth, keen, unmistakable, and slicing, had a way of unraveling even the most resilient facade. The air in the room was so charged with tension that it seemed near suffocating, as though anyone who breathed too hard would set off a landslide of feelings. Mary's voice caught as she started to read aloud, her tone slow, each syllable carefully calibrated. The papers in her hand contained financial transactions that Cody had intentionally hidden from the world. A home built by a family, one representing years of toil, harmony, and common vision, had been disposed of without any discussion or permission. The discovery of this betrayal came like a blow to the stomach. The wives breathed softly in unison, their eyes meeting with the same unheard question. Why would he do this to us? Her betrayal was deeper than anyone had ever envisioned. It was never about money or property. It was about love, respect, and trust. Core values Cody had destroyed with his secretive behavior. The children, quietly seated in the back, were too young to comprehend the financial and legal details, but even they could feel the tension and heartache surrounding the room. Their expression, baffled, scared, and betrayed, was sufficient to constrict Mary's chest with remorse and grief. She had to struggle not to cry as she went on, aware that each word spoken was taking her closer to justice, not vengeance. The courtroom narrowed around her, the walls shutting in on her with the baggage of emotion. Mary felt the eyes of the witnesses, the lens of the cameras that followed her every step, the judge's probing eyes watching her every sentence. But none of it mattered. The truth needed to be spoken, and she alone could speak it with the candor and strength needed. As she went through the documents, showing receipts, emails, and bank statements, Mary's voice rose in power. "This was our family's heritage," she exclaimed, her voice shaking but firm. "And you sold it without a word to the very people who trusted you the most, the people who believed you, the people you swore to protect." The courtroom exploded, not in sound but in tension. Wives looked at each other with decades of unspoken resentment. Each of them had lived through moments of still betrayal, moments when Cody's focus or affection had been elsewhere, moments when they'd felt like strangers in their house. But this was undeniable. This was a boundary broken, a line crossed. Mary Brown, normally reserved and stoic, squirmed in her seat. Her fingers drummed at the top of her sleeve as she gazed at Mary, silently recognizing the courage it took to remain standing. Even the youngest wife, who had been so favored by her smile and her proximity to Cody, felt guilty and afraid. How had they all overlooked the cues for so long? How had they let secrecy and silence control their family? Cody cleared his throat, at last finding his voice, but it didn't ring true. Mary, it didn't happen like this. Mary shut him down, her eyes flashing with a combination of anger and resolve. How exactly it went down, Cody? You think I'm going to stand here and let you spin every tale, every fact, and we the family bleed in silence? Her voice trembled on the brink of a scream. Do you have any idea what it's like to see your family's dreams, your children's future being broken apart without their awareness? The judge, a towering man with a serene yet authoritative demeanor, held up a hand asking for order. But even he sensed the palpable tingle of raw emotion present. He leaned forward a little, his eyes narrowing at Cody. Sir, these are serious charges. He spoke slowly, his voice measured. You will have your opportunity to defend yourself, but presently we hear the testimony. Mary swallowed hard, her mouth parched, but she continued. She related the sleepless nights lying awake worrying about what the future held for the family, the times she had gone behind closed doors to confront Cody only to be confronted with vague explanations and blame shifting. She recounted her children's naivest questions regarding money, their house, why everything did not feel the same anymore. Every word created a rich image of betrayal, heartache, and the profound emotional wounds caused by secrets. The courtroom crowd, even the television audience at home, felt the tension. You could almost hear the mass heartbeat, the gasps, the stifled sobs. This was no legal issue. This was an emotional accounting. Mary's bravery was certain, and her voice, although trembling occasionally, penetrated the walls of lies Cody had constructed around himself. When she came to the close of the first part of her testimony, Mary hesitated, holding aloft the final document, a letter from Cody himself, months before, admitting to the sale and his intentional deception. The page trembled in her hands, yet her eyes never left theirs. This was the moment the family could no longer pretend not to see, the unmistakable truth revealed. The courtroom hung there for a long moment, silent. Even Cody, normally so steady, seemed bare, naked, and adrift. The wives were in stunned silence, grappling with a betrayal that transcended money. It was a betrayal of trust, of love, of family cohesion. Mary's red, tear-stained eyes met each of theirs, unspoken, saying, "We face this together." The kids, still in the back, observed their mother's courage with open eyes. They did not yet comprehend the legalities involved, but they knew about courage, honesty, and the anguish of betrayal. And in that instant, Mary Brown was not only fighting for justice, she was fighting for her family's soul. At the conclusion of this first session, something was certain: nothing would ever be the same again. The walls of silence had collapsed, and the truth, raw, searing, and undeniable, had been let loose. History would be witnessed that day in the courtroom, but more fundamentally, the family would face a truth that could destroy them or, through courage and honesty, start the long journey toward healing. The courtroom tension was oppressive, a palpable weighty presence over all. All eyes were on Mary, but now the focus subtly narrowed to Mary Brown. Cool, reserved, and quietly watching as a rule, Mary stood up hesitantly, her nervous fingers ringing around the edge of her sleeve. The air grew charged as she was about to talk, the crowd leaning forward involuntarily, knowing the emotional storm ready to erupt. "Your Honor," Mary started, her voice only slightly shaking, revealing the depth of what she was experiencing. "We have all shared the same roof, but some of us have been invisible for years." Words were unspoken, feelings disregarded, actions questioned, quietly, silently, day after day. She stopped, taking a breath, her eyes meeting Cody's. "I have attempted to be patient. I have attempted to understand. But enough is enough. Today I am not only speaking for myself, but the whole family." A whispered gasp filled the courtroom. It was not loud, but it had the power of stored-up emotion bottled up for years. The wives stirred in their seats, some wiping away tears on dainty tissues, others holding hands over their chests, as if preparing for a physical blow. The children in the back, sitting respectfully, sat with wide eyes as their normally stoic mother unbuttoned her heart for all to see. Mary went on, telling of the quiet betrayals. There were nights when I waited in the shadows while decisions were made and choices were favored over our voices, over our hearts. I attempted to convince myself it was for the family's good, but it felt like we were just spectators in our own lives. Her voice cracked, but she continued, every word an edge, slicing through the facade that all was well. Mary's fists gripped the papers she had clutched, her knuckles white. She was relieved and sorrowful. Relieved because someone else finally recognized the quiet agony she had silently endured alone, and sorrowful because it took so long before the truth was spoken. The courtroom was not merely a court of law anymore. It was now a platform for the raw, open emotions of a family on the brink of disintegration. The youngest wife, usually reserved and smiling, whispered inaudibly, "She's telling the truth." Her whisper, despite being soft, echoed in the courtroom like a tiny flame in a tempest. Even those viewing in the audience at home were able to sense the emotional weight of the moment. This wasn't a tale of property or money. This was a tale of hearts shattered through silence and lies. Cody shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his shoulders tightening. For the first time, the well-rehearsed aura of authority he had maintained for so long was beginning to crumble. The courtroom, which had erupted into gasps, whispers and the odd sniffle, no longer bent to his will. The eyes of each wife pierced him, questioning silently his integrity, his honesty, and his capacity to guide the family with justice. Mary's voice became louder, fed by years of pent-up anguish. "I've kept quiet for far too long. I've smiled and nodded, and pretended that everything was fine, all the time aware that I was suffocating under my own fears and doubts. We are meant to be a family, a unit, tied together by trust, love and respect. And yet that trust has been repeatedly broken." The courtroom breathed a collective gasp. The audience, both present in the room and sitting at home, could sense the intangible walls shattering. It was more than a trial. It was a settling of accounts, a time when years of accumulated emotion came face to face with the bitter truth of betrayal. Every wife, every child, every observer was swept up in the whirlpool of agony, rage and grief. Mary, feeling the wave of support and shared pain, spoke softly to herself, a mantra she had repeated in private countless times. "This is for the truth. This is for our family." And as Mary's testimony continued, that mantra became a beacon of strength. "I am not perfect," Mary confessed, tears running down her face. "I have flaws, mistakes, but I have always attempted to love, to keep this family together. And yet, I feel as though my voice, our voices, have been disregarded. We have been asked to just accept, to forgive, to forget, never hearing us at all." Her words strike like arrows, piercing carefully constructed masks of familial harmony. The other wives, inspired by Mary's courage, began to speak softly among themselves. One whispered a memory of a night spent worrying about bills, while another recalled a painful argument that had been swept under the rug. Even the quietest moments of neglect, the subtle dismissals, were now being illuminated in the courtroom's harsh light. The judge, watching this emotional tempest rage on, leaned forward a bit. His gavel remained idle, a quiet witness to this melodrama of the heart. He realized that all of this transcended the law. It was a family coming apart before him, laying bare scars that had hidden in the shadows too long. Cody finally tried to speak, his words trembling. "Mary, I weep." But the words did not ring true. His masterfully crafted defenses, his scripted apologies, could not overcome the stark honesty coming from Mary. The energy in the courtroom changed. For the first time, it appeared that the truth, and the emotional strength to confront it, was stronger than fear, manipulation or control. The children felt the tension and shifted uncomfortably in their seats. One of the youngest whispered to a brother, "Mommy's brave." Even they understood the bravery needed to fight betrayal, to speak freely even in fear, and to require recognition of the suffering born. Mary's voice was softer now, almost a whisper, but each word was powerfully felt. "I do not want revenge. I do not want to destroy. I just ask for recognition. I ask for honesty. I ask for respect that we deserve as a family. That is all that I have ever wanted." The courtroom fell silent once more, but this time the silence was heavy with understanding. The wives, the kids, and even the courtroom crowd knew this trial was no longer merely about accounting records and backroom negotiations. It was about survival, about facing years of overlooking, hiddenness, and unspoken hurt. Mary experienced an outburst of thankfulness and sorrow intertwined. Thankfulness that at last someone had spoken the truth out loud, and sadness because it had taken years. The silences that had engulfed the family for so long were breaking, and as painful as it was, there was a strange sense of hope, hidden in the mayhem. As Mary descended from the stand, her shoulders shaking but her head held high, Mary experienced a change. The courtroom was no longer simply an arena of accusation. It had evolved into a sanctuary of bravery, a platform where hearts could be laid bare, where long repressed emotions could at last find voice. Even Cody appeared to understand the significance of the moment. The rickety facade of control and authority was erased, replaced by a vulnerable, exposed man who was compelled to face the emotional costs of his actions. And even though the war was far from finished, the first cracks in the wall of lies had been produced. The people at home, who were watching the live stream or snippets posted online, experienced the raw tension and emotion as if they had been sitting in the very seats of the courtroom. This was not a tale of betrayal, it was a tale of courage, honesty, and the dawning of emotional reckoning. At the close of this session, one thing was certain: emotions had been unleashed, and things would never be the same again. Silos of silence had been breached, and the family, though traumatized, had made its first step toward dealing with the pain that had haunted them for years. The courtroom was in suspension. All eyes were on Mary Brown as she grasped the letter that would alter the course of her life. It was not an ordinary letter. It was a confession, penned by Cody himself months before, admitting to the clandestine sale of the family land and the willful withholding from the wives. The moment was dreamlike, cinematic, as Mary waved the letter above her, hands trembling but spirit unshaken. "This is the truth," she spoke softly, her voice trembling but firm enough to reach into the farthest reaches of the courtroom. "This is what I have lived with in silence for far too long." She started to read aloud, each word crystalline, precise, and charged with feeling. The confession unveiled not just the economic betrayal, but also the clandestine manipulation, the studious evasion of family conversations, and the erosion of trust in the wives. Mary's voice strengthened with each verse, as it was driven by years of pent-up resentment and sorrow. The audience felt the weight of emotion as if it was squeezing on their very hearts. Mary leaned forward, her hands tightly clasped together, nodding slightly. While it was Mary speaking, Mary felt the words to be her own. All the lies, all the secrets, all the insidious manipulations that had been hidden for so many years, finally had a name, a motive, and a face: Cody. She saw anger, sadness, and grief. The courtroom was no longer the legal arena. It was now a refuge for truth, and an arena for emotional accounting. Mary took a moment to brush tears from her face, her voice cracking. "Do you know what it's like to see your family fall apart feeling helpless? To feel every night like the person you loved most has betrayed you without apology." She stared straight at Cody, her eyes blazing with a combination of anger and pain. "Do you know the nights I wept in silence? The times I doubted all that I held dear? The fear I bore for my children's future?" The wives looked at each other, their own tears mirroring the shared agony. For so many years, they had been made invisible, silent, and played like pawns. But today, in this courtroom, their common pain was being heard, validated, and accepted. The courtroom appeared to be charged with emotion, an intangible tension that thickened and heavified the air. Even Cody, sitting at the defense table, appeared disoriented. For the first time, his carefully constructed facade of control unraveled. The walls of denial and manipulation he had constructed over the years were imploding under the force of irreproachable truth. His efforts to preserve composure were not working. His hands wriggled restlessly, and his eyes flicked repeatedly toward Mary, not knowing what to do. Mary went on, her voice rising. She described the endless sleepless nights, the dread of losing the trust of her children, and the emotional weariness of faking it all being okay. "I have been carrying this burden on my own for too long," she stated, her eyes welling up with tears, "and I will not let it go on in silence. My children deserve the truth. My family deserves the truth. and I deserve the truth. The judge, watching the raw emotional depth, was calm but focused. He knew that what he was witnessing was not simply a question of legality, but a very intimate emotional accounting. This was a tale of betrayal, love, trust, and the price of dishonesty. It was a testament to the human potential for bravery in the face of unbearable emotional anguish. Mary breathed deeply, and then stood once more, her own voice shaking as she stepped forward. She stated her own account, admitting to her own errors, but stressing honesty and transparency. I have erred, I will admit, she spoke softly but firmly, but I have never concealed the truth. I have never deceived or betrayed. I only ask for fairness, for respect, and for the recognition that our voices matter. Her words hung in the air of the courtroom. The children, the wives, and the onlookers could sense the gravity of each word. It seemed like the walls were taking in the pain, the hurt, and the despair being spoken aloud. This was more than testimony. This was a naked, unadulterated admission of years of pain and strength. Mary came back onto the stand, her hands folded around the letter in a tight grip. This isn't about revenge, she stated, her voice even but resolute. This is about acknowledgement, accountability, and the hope that we can recreate what was shattered. The property, the money, even the trust, we can try to rebuild all of that, but only if we begin with the truth. The audience was able to sense her desperation and her bravery to an equal degree. She wasn't just reading off words on a piece of paper, she was living each moment of agony, each night of terror, each moment of uncertainty. It was an act of honesty, of raw emotion, of courage, a performance that had no place for denial or doubt. Cody attempted to speak at last, his voice low and uncertain. Mary, I didn't mean for it to but Mary's eyes silenced him. You didn't mean for it to what? Ruin our family, shatter our trust, make us doubt every choice, every word, every vow. Your intentions don't wipe away the harm, Cody. The truth does. And today, the truth is here. The court was like holding its breath once more. The children, who now knew the seriousness of the situation, looked at each other with concern. They had always believed their father without question, but the revelations were destroying the secure, comfortable world they knew. The anguish on their faces reflected the anguish in their mothers' hearts, a pain which was fresh, tangible, and poignant. Mary took another step forward, this time directly to the court in general, not only to Cody. We have lived under one roof, shared the same hopes and dreams, and shared the same responsibilities. And yet, dishonesty has been permitted to grow. We have tolerated this quietly, but quietly it is no longer possible. We call for recognition, we call for accountability, we call for the truth, in full and in entirety. Her words struck like rocks, causing waves in the courtroom. The wives, in admiration of her courage, straightened their spines, their determination hardening. The children, witnessing the courage of their mothers, learned a valuable lesson, that truth, no matter how painful, was the only way to heal. Mary folded the letter, pressing it to her chest, her tears shining but resolute. This is not a matter of law, she stated, her voice firm, ringing out through the room. This is our lives, our family, our hearts, and we will not be silenced. We will not be ignored. The truth will be heard, and we will rebuild. One honest step at a time. The judge nodded, its recognition of the courage it had taken to meet betrayal with such candor. Cody sat still, visibly shaken, no longer the composed, confident man he once was. The courtroom had evolved from a setting of accusation to a platform for emotional accountability, and the first real triumph, truthfulness, had been won. At the conclusion of this session, it was unmistakable that the trial was now longer merely about money or property. It was about healing, responsibility, and the transforming power of the truth, to uncover lies, and initiate the long journey of restoring a family destroyed by deceit. The audience, both local and watching via the media, was able to sense the passion, the tragedy, and the bravery which characterized this court drama. The women had spoken, the children had seen courage, and Cody, for the first time, confronted the raw truth of the emotional toll of what he had done. The courtroom was no longer a sphere of control, it had become a crucible of honesty, suffering, and the dawning of redemption. The courtroom was charged with the raw energy of betrayal, heartbreak, and years of pent-up anger. Each heartbeat felt louder, as Cody sat, his own facade of control, fragmenting with each second. For the first time, the mirage of control he had so meticulously cultivated for years had started to disintegrate. The burden of reality, borne down on him by the women he had attempted to control emotionally, bore down on him relentlessly. Mary Brown, standing firmly in the front row, felt a stillness of relief. The letters, the ledgers, and her own testimony had hit hard, but the battle was far from won. She looked at Mary, whose eyes sparkled with determination and grief. Together, they had set the stage for an accounting. The time had come to push ahead, to call for a reckoning that could no longer be delayed. The judge, feeling the change in the atmosphere, cleared his throat. Cody Brown, you heard the testaments. You witnessed the proof. Now you get the chance to reply in full. Cody's voice, previously confident and unshakable, quivered slightly. I didn't mean for this. I never expected it to impact everyone like this. The words rang hollow, empty sounds in a courtroom where there had been years of pain. The audience, in attendance and on television, could sense the gap between Cody's words and the actuality of what he had done. The families had been betrayed, and his words were not enough to repair the damage. Mary stood again, moving closer to the bench, her voice firm but tinged with emotion. Intentions are worthless without honesty. We can forgive errors, we can see mistakes, but we cannot accept dishonesty. Not from the man who vowed to guide, to shelter, and to honor this family. Mary nodded wordlessly, her heart filling with pride. She felt the courtroom pause in collective breath, anticipating the emotional climax about to unfold. The crowd could sense it too, a moment suspended between tragedy and the beginnings of hope. Cody's defenses fell before the combined courage of the wives. He tried to explain himself, stuttering over apologies of business stress, family obligations, and miscommunication. Each statement was answered quietly, but firmly by Mary and Mary, whose impassioned testimonies had already exposed the truth of the harm he had done. You talk of pressures? Mary's voice lifted, deep and commanding. Do you have any idea the pressure we've existed under? Not knowing, not trusting, dreading every choice you made behind closed doors. Do you have any idea the fear in our children's eyes? The nights we spent lying awake, wondering what other secret would be revealed next. The courtroom was still except for her voice, which rang off the walls with the heavy burden of years of unspoken pain. Even the other wives, who had frequently argued with Mary in the privacy of their homes, nodded together in agreement, their hearts united in common sorrow and resolve. Mary breathed in deeply and went on, we have been faithful, we have been patient, and we have borne the emotional burden of secrecy for far too long. The family that you believe you control is greater than your power. We are individuals. We are mothers, wives, and human beings that deserve truth, respect, and dignity. Cody looked away, his eyes flying to each wife, and then back at Mary and Mary. He was witnessing, maybe for the first time, the complete range of the emotional impact of what he had done. The courtroom was not just a place of law anymore. It had become a crucible of responsibility, reality, and stark emotion. The children, feeling the seriousness of the situation, sat in silence, fingers interwoven. They observed their parents' bravery before them, learning about honesty, integrity, and the cost of lying. Even the youngest child, wide-eyed with comprehension, breathed softly, "Mommy's telling the truth." Mary's voice softened a little bit, but what she said was even stronger. Cody, this isn't punishment. This is responsibility. This is accepting that our family, our kids, and even you need to confront the truth. Only then can we start over. Only then can trust start building again. The judge nodded, recognizing the deep significance of the moment. This court is not simply a forum in which to settle money issues. He spoke slowly. It is where honesty and truth must be confronted. The evidence brought here does not only represent legal issues, but the psychological health of the family in question. The court appreciates how much courage it takes to face betrayal. Mary presented the letter, the confession of Cody, to the court clerk, making sure that each word was recorded and irrefutable. The courtroom appeared to be holding its breath when the judge read from the pages, his eyebrows furrowing as the implications of Cody's deeds became apparent. Cody's voice broke as he made his first effort to apologize. but it was stammering, inadequate, and raw. I never meant for it to go so far. I, I'm sorry. Mary approached, her voice stern but not cruel. Your apologies are of little value without acknowledgement. You have to take the consequences, make reparation, and demonstrate by action, not words, that this family can be trusted again. Words cannot erase years of unspoken decisions. Only transparency and accountability can. Mary, her chest constricted with feeling, continued, We are not requesting perfection. We are requesting honesty. We are requesting fairness. And we are requesting that you acknowledge the hurt your silence has created, not just with us but with our children, who deserve a truthful, stable family. The courtroom atmosphere changed overnight. Cody, previously the uncontested person in authority, now stood open to examination, compelled by both legal and emotional accountability. The collective bravery of the wives had brought about a turning point, a moment in which reality and courage bested deception and manipulation. The judge leaned forward, his tone heavy with finality. Cody Brown, it is obvious that your actions have done a lot of damage, financially and emotionally. This court recognizes the courage of the parties who have stepped forward to testify. The road ahead demands accountability, openness, and reconciliation where it is possible. Mary exchanged a silent, fleeting glance, an unspoken understanding that they had won the first huge battle. The emotional and legal currents had reversed. For the first time in years, the family had an opportunity to start anew on the foundation of truth, with the walls of secrecy finally starting to fall. The children, seeing their mother's courage, started to comprehend the seriousness of truth and responsibility. This was not a legal turning point. It was a deeply personal one. The family was on the path to healing, and it was evident that the fortitude, strength, and candor of the women had altered the trajectory of their future for good. Even as Cody remained still, taking in the gravity of what he had done, the courtroom was charged with a sense of hope. Steps toward redemption had been made. The women had gotten their voices back. The children had seen bravery, and the family, battered and bruised as they were, was no longer ensnared in a world of secrecy and dishonesty. At the end of this chapter, the turning point was undeniable. The legal and emotional struggle had come to a point where accountability, truth, and courage had tilted the scale. The family could start the long, agonizing but hopeful process of reconciliation. And the courtroom, which had been a room of tension and dread, had become a stage for honesty, transformation, and the beginning of healing. The courtroom had changed from a battlefield of deception to a room of careful introspection. The burden of honesty weighed heavily in the air, but for the first time, hope existed. Mary, standing together, could sense the tension slacken. The breaking point had been reached. Deception and secrecy could no longer reign supreme. Honesty had finally risen to claim its station. The judge, whose face had been pinched and authoritative throughout the trial, leaned forward and spoke to the courtroom with measured seriousness. This case is not merely one of money, but also one of emotional responsibility, he stated. The players in this drama have shown courage in addressing repressed realities. It is the court's duty to see that justice, both legal and emotional, is administered. Cody sat silently, his chin pressed to his chest, soaking in the gravity of the decision. For years he had exercised power over his family with the assurance that his secrets were safe. Now, with inexorable proof and unvarnished emotional testimony, he was compelled to confront a new world, one in which truth, not power, governed the way ahead. Mary's voice, still shaking at the ferocity of the previous sessions, interrupted the silence. We are not here to tear down anyone. We are here to safeguard what is left to us. Our family, our children, and our relationships. There is still hope to rebuild, but we need honesty, accountability, and a willingness to change. Mary nodded in agreement, gazing about the courtroom to lock eyes with each of the wives. We have all been betrayed, kept in secret, and emotionally neglected. But this family can still heal if we decide to choose truth, not lies, and courage, not silence. The judge accepted their testimony. The court requires that everything financial be cleared up and settled in an open manner. Cody Brown must make full disclosure and restitution as warranted. More crucially, the court stresses that constant communication and emotional responsibility are key to the welfare of this family. Mary and Mary exchanged a quick wordless look, a combination of relief, fatigue, and pride. The verdict was more than a legal win. It was an emotional validation that their bravery had been acknowledged. They had found their voices, and the groundwork for a more honest and integrated family was established. The children, having listened to the trial as a combination of bewilderment and curiosity, began to feel the shift. Although young, they recognized that courage may be manifested in many ways: standing up for what is right, telling the truth, and standing against those who have hurt. The lesson was powerful. Their mother's acts of courage were a template for integrity, strength, and hope. Outside the courtroom, the family stood together in a sunlit, quiet courtyard. The air was fresh, with the scent of renewal. Mary put an arm around one of her children, experiencing the comfort of family closeness after months of fear and doubt. Mary stood at her side, holding hands with another child, a moment of silent connection. The children giggled softly, a sound missing through the tense months of lies. Cody, now with full knowledge of the emotional repercussions of his actions, came forward carefully. His face was etched with remorse, and his voice was less stern, with an air of humility. "I see now the hurt I inflicted," he confessed. "I know that words will never be able to repair this. I am determined to make amends, to regain trust, and to restore our family." Mary, cautiously, but open to making the initial moves toward healing, nodded. "Words will not be enough. The judge has rendered his verdict, and now all of us must act. Healing is a process, and it starts with truth." Mary continued, "We have a decision: to allow this betrayal to define us, or to allow it to educate us. We can come through stronger, closer, and more resilient if we decide to confront the truth together." The setting was poignant. The sun fell through the windows, bathing the family in a warm glow as they made cautious moves toward reconciliation. Every member knew that the journey ahead would not be simple. There would be obstacles, hard talks, and doubts. But for the first time in years, there was simplicity, candor, and a common promise to restart. Mary thought about the path that they had traveled to get where they were. The betrayal, the deception, and the heartache had been agonizing. But they had also uncovered the inner fortitude of people who would not be silenced. Courage had been their compass, and truth their torch. Out of adversity, they had found strength, and in doing so they had redefined family. Mary's thoughts mirrored Mary's. She realized that redemption was not about forgiving blindly, but about demanding accountability, ensuring lessons were learned, and creating a foundation of trust that could withstand future storms. The courtroom had been the catalyst, but the real work, the emotional labor of rebuilding, was only beginning. The children, feeling the lighter mood, started to play quietly in the courtyard, their giggles a soothing balm on the old wounds. It was a reminder that there was always hope, even during the darkest of times, and that this hope could be nurtured and be given room to grow. The bonds of the family, though stretched thin, were being remade in every honest conversation, every shared memory, and every act of responsibility. As evening fell, Mary, and the other wives sat in silence together, thinking about the emotional path they had been on. There was sadness, certainly, but also pride. Pride in their strength, pride in their resilience, and pride in their dedication to the truth. They had encountered betrayal, revealed lies, and come out the other side stronger and stronger, poised to lead their family towards a brighter future built on honesty, respect, and love. Cody, a humbled member of the healing process, learned that redemption was a work of ongoing effort, patience, and emotional integrity. It was not something to be expected or demanded. It was wrought through honest deeds and steadfast dedication. He learned for the first time that leadership was not about control, but about openness, concern, and accountability. Mary whispered to Mary, a gentle declaration of support. "We've gone a long way, and it's not yet done. But at least now we have hope to rebuild, and we will do this together." Mary smiled weakly, with tears in her eyes. "Yes, together." As they exited the courtroom, hand in hand, there was closure, but also a sense of anticipation for the healing that would come. They had weathered the storm, battled betrayal, and learned that even the deepest wounds could start to heal when addressed with courage, honesty, and love. The Brown family's story, though blemished, had become one of redemption. The court had issued its verdict, but the real triumph was emotional, regaining their voices, accepting responsibility, and fostering hope. For Mary, and the rest of the family, this marked the start of a new chapter, one that would be led by truth, courage, and love. The courtroom doors shut after them. But the lessons remained. Betrayal did not break the human spirit. Bravery could cut through the darkest of shadows. And redemption, while hard-earned, was always within reach, when there was honesty and emotional responsibility guiding the way. The Brown family, which had been broken, now stood at the crossroads of healing. The past would forever be theirs, but it would no longer control them. The future was theirs to forge, guided by the lessons they had learned, the ties that had been rekindled, and the unrelenting courage of those who had refused to remain quiet. And thus, with broken but trusting hearts, the family moved forward into the light, prepared to start over, to forgive, and to welcome the promise of beginnings.